The planet was in chaos. A massive battle was raging between the human rebellion and the alien empire that sought to control the galaxy. The sky was filled with the roar of spacecraft, and the ground shook with the sound of gunfire and explosions. The rebellion had been fighting for years, but today felt different. Today, something extraordinary was about to happen. Elia, a young officer of the alien empire, stood at the front lines, her heart pounding as she observed the unfolding conflict. She was no stranger to battle. The alien empire had trained her, since childhood, to be a warrior, a soldier in their relentless quest for power. Her people were advanced in technology, their fleets unstoppable and their armies vast. But today something was troubling her. There was a new player on the battlefield, one she hadn't expected. It started when a giant war machine appeared on the horizon. It was massive, towering over the battlefield with armored plating and weapons that looked capable of wiping out entire divisions. Elia's first instinct was to assume it was a human war machine, a piece of alien technology that the humans had somehow obtained. But as the machine moved, she noticed something strange. The movements were different from what she expected. They were too precise, too deliberate. The machine moved with a kind of fluidity that seemed almost human. Elia narrowed her eyes, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The machine wasn't just following commands, it was thinking, it was reacting, it was alive. From her vantage point, Elia watched as the war machine pushed forward, cutting through the alien forces with ease. Its weapons fired with perfect accuracy, its movements smooth and calculated. She had never seen anything like it. The human rebellion was known for using unconventional tactics, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a weapon. This was a force of nature. As the battle raged around her, Elia's curiosity grew. She had been trained to fight with precision, to follow orders without hesitation, but this machine, this human, was something different. Elia had never encountered a human who fought with such determination and strategy. The alien empire had always considered humans inferior, a species with primitive technology and weak forces. But now, watching this war machine in action, Elia was starting to question everything she had been taught. The war machine continued to cut through the battlefield, leaving destruction in its wake. But as the dust settled, Elia saw something that made her blood run cold. The machine was stopping. It was standing still, as if it was waiting. Waiting for what? And then she saw it. A figure in the cockpit, moving with a kind of calm assurance that made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't an alien as she had expected. It wasn't a machine controlling itself. The figure in the cockpit was a human. Elia blinked, disbelief spreading through her. She had assumed that the war machine was an alien creation, something designed to give the humans an advantage. But it wasn't. It was a human soldier, controlling the machine with incredible skill. She couldn't believe it. A human in a war machine? The thought was almost laughable, but as she watched the human soldier move, she realized something even more shocking. This human wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just fighting. He was commanding. He was thinking. He was making decisions on the battlefield as if he knew exactly what was going to happen next. Elia's mind raced as she tried to process what she had just seen. How could a human be so skilled, so composed? She had been taught that humans were weak, that they were no match for the might of the alien empire. But here, right in front of her, was a human who was more capable than any alien warrior she had ever encountered. The human soldier didn't look like a hero from the stories she had heard. He wasn't tall, muscular, or imposing. He didn't have the glowing alien armor or advanced weaponry that the Empire's soldiers were equipped with. He was just human. But there was something about him, something that made him stand out in a way that no alien soldier could. It was his determination, his drive, his willingness to fight against the odds. Elia found herself captivated by it. For the first time in her life, Elia felt a strange sensation creeping into her chest. It was admiration, mixed with a hint of something else she couldn't quite name. She had been trained to see humans as nothing more than obstacles in her path, but now she was starting to see them in a new light. The human soldier, still in his war machine, moved forward again, joining the human forces in their fight. He was a force to be reckoned with, a one-man army who had single-handedly changed the course of the battle. Elia watched as he tore through the enemy lines, his every move a testament to his skill and bravery. She couldn't take her eyes off him. As the battle raged on, Elia's thoughts were consumed by the human soldier. What kind of person could possess such strength, such resolve? She had always been told that humans were weak, that they relied on technology and weapons to survive. But this human was different. He didn't need advanced technology to be powerful. He had something far more dangerous, something that no alien empire could ever replicate: the power of the human spirit. Elia's mind spun with questions. Who was this human? Why had he come to this battlefield? And what did it mean for the future of the war? She knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The battle had just started, and she was about to learn a lot more about the human soldier who had taken her by surprise. The sounds of war echoed across the battlefield as Elia moved cautiously through the wreckage. The battle had taken a brutal turn, but her focus wasn't on the chaos around her. Her mind kept returning to the image of the human soldier in the war machine. She couldn't understand it. How could a human, someone her people had long considered weak, possibly be inside that powerful machine? She had been trained to kill without hesitation, to see her enemies as less than nothing. But this human had changed everything. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with. As the battle began to settle into an eerie silence, Elia knew she had to learn more. She had to understand who this human was and why he seemed so different from the others. As the night fell, Elia slipped into the shadows, her alien armor blending into the dark landscape. She was on a mission, one that she never expected to undertake. The human soldier had stopped fighting and now stood among the wreckage, his war machine slowly coming to a halt. She knew this was her chance. From her position in the distance, she watched as the human climbed out of the machine. His movements were slow, almost casual, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her pause. He wasn't afraid. Elia had seen fear in the eyes of every enemy she had ever faced. But this man, this human, was different. The human stepped away from the machine, his armor clinking as he moved. Elia felt an odd feeling twist in her stomach. She had never felt this way before, curious and yet cautious, as if the answers she sought were just out of reach. She waited, allowing him to move deeper into the wreckage, until she was sure he was alone. With a deep breath, Elia made her move. She stepped into the open, making sure the human saw her. His eyes locked onto her instantly, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Elia raised her hand in peace, silently signaling that she meant no harm. To her surprise, the human didn't immediately attack. Instead, he looked at her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, as if he were just as confused by her presence as she was by his. "You're alone," Elia said, her voice calm but filled with questions. She had never spoken to a human like this before. They were always enemies, always to be fought and defeated. But now, standing in front of her was a human, unarmed and yet holding her attention in a way no one else had. The human didn't respond at first, his eyes scanning her armor. He was trying to figure her out, just as she was trying to understand him. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough but steady. "I'm not what you think I am," he said, his words carrying a weight that Elia wasn't expecting. Elia's curiosity deepened. "What do you mean?" she asked, lowering her guard but keeping her distance. She was still unsure if she could trust him even after everything she had witnessed. The human sighed, his gaze softening as he took a step forward. "You think I'm a machine," he said, gesturing to the war machine behind him. "But I'm just a man who's been put into a suit of armor and told to fight." Elia blinked, processing his words. "You're inside that machine? But how? I thought humans couldn't..." He cut her off. No, we can't. But we're forced to. The armor is just a tool. It's not the real strength, he said, his eyes now meeting hers with a new kind of intensity. The real strength comes from inside, from us, from our will to survive, no matter the cost. Elia's mind raced. Everything she had believed about humans, about their weaknesses, was being challenged by this one man. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just using technology to fight. He was doing something far more profound. He was fighting for a reason that went beyond victory or defeat. I don't understand, Elia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. How can you fight like this? How can you face so many, knowing you're outmatched, outgunned? My people, we don't understand how you do it. The human's gaze softened, and for the first time Elia saw something in his eyes, something that reminded her of her own people before they became consumed by their lust for power. It was the spark of hope. It's simple, he said, his voice steady. We fight because we believe. We fight for what we love. We fight for freedom, and we never give up. Not ever. Elia stood silently, absorbing his words. She had never heard anything like this before. Her people fought for power, for control. They used technology as a tool of domination, a way to bend others to their will. But this human, this man, fought because of a belief. He didn't fight to conquer. He fought to protect. Her mind was spinning with new ideas, new perspectives that she had never considered. Could it be true? Could humans really be stronger than her people, not because of their technology or their advanced weapons, but because of their hearts, because of their unwavering belief in their cause? The human took a step closer to her, and for the first time, Elia felt a sense of uncertainty. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of something new. The human smiled faintly. You should go, he said. The battle isn't over, and you have your orders. But remember this, Elia. The war doesn't end with who has the bigger weapons. It ends with who has the bigger heart. Elia stood there speechless. As the human turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder if the war could really be won by something as simple as belief. The thought lingered in her mind, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope in her chest. She would never look at humans the same way again. The days after Elia's encounter with Marcus, the human soldier, passed in a blur. The war continued to rage on as it always did, with the alien empire pushing forward against the rebellion. But in the quiet moments, when Elia found herself alone in her quarters, her mind constantly returned to the conversation she had shared with the human. What Marcus had said kept echoing in her mind. We fight for what we love. We fight for freedom, and we never give up. Not ever. Those words seemed to challenge everything she had been taught, everything she had believed in since childhood. Her people fought to maintain control, to expand their empire, to crush anyone who opposed them. But Marcus, he fought for something else, something more. His belief in his cause, his unwavering confidence, had shaken her to the core. As a soldier of the alien empire, Elia had been trained to view humans as weak. They were nothing more than obstacles in the way of her people's grand plans. They had inferior technology, they were disorganized, and they lacked the power her people had. But Marcus had proven her wrong. In a way, he had opened her eyes to something she had never considered. That perhaps strength wasn't just about technology or superior weapons. Perhaps true strength came from within. The thought nagged at her every day. She had been raised to believe that humans were insignificant, that they could never pose a serious threat to the might of the alien empire. But Marcus, standing before her in that war machine, had shown her otherwise. He had fought not because of his weapons or his armor, but because of his heart. And it was that heart, that unwavering determination, that had made him dangerous, not just to her, but to the entire empire. One evening, as Elia stood on the balcony of her ship, looking out over the war-torn landscape, she saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Marcus, though he was far away, moving through the smoke and rubble. He was alone, walking toward the rebel lines, and Alia knew that he was preparing for another fight. She had seen him like this before, focused and resolute, and it struck her how much he reminded her of her own people. For a brief moment, she wondered what it would be like if her people fought with the same purpose. What if they fought for something, more than just conquest? Could they fighting for something meaningful? It won't matter in the end. Alia's heart skipped a beat. She had always thought that her people were the ones who understood what mattered. They fought for their empire, for their future, for their survival. But Marcus had shown her that perhaps their view was narrow. Perhaps there was more to life than just power. But what about your people? Alia asked, her voice a little more tentative. The humans. You're outnumbered, outmatched. How do you keep fighting if you don't have the strength of numbers or the resources? Marcus looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because we don't fight alone, he said. We fight for each other. We fight as a community. As one. When one person falls, others rise to take their place. That's what makes us strong. Alia took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never thought of humans like that. She had always viewed them as disjointed, scattered, and lacking the unity that the Empire had. But here, Marcus was telling her something different. That the strength of humanity came from their ability to come together, to fight for each other, not just for themselves. For the first time in her life, Alia realized that she had been wrong. Humans weren't weak. They weren't inferior. They were powerful in ways she had never understood. She turned to face the battlefield once more, the horizon stretching out before her. The war wasn't over. The fighting would continue, and both sides would keep battling for what they believed in. But for Alia, everything had changed. She no longer saw the world through the same lens. She could no longer view the humans as just enemies to be defeated. They were something more. They were fighters, survivors, and maybe, just maybe, they were the key to ending this war. I think I'm starting to understand, Alia said softly, her voice filled with new determination. Maybe there's more to this fight than just winning. Marcus didn't respond right away, but the small, knowing smile on his face was all the answer she needed. Together, they would find a way to end the war, not through power or conquest, but through something deeper. Something that neither the alien empire nor the human rebellion had ever fully grasped. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Alia's thoughts constantly circled back to Marcus and his words. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had known about her world, her people, and even herself was shifting. Her training, her loyalty to the empire, had always been absolute. But now, after everything she had seen, she found herself questioning those very ideals. The war had become a constant rhythm of battle. Alia was still assigned to lead her troops, still carrying out the orders of her superiors. But now, every time she stepped onto the battlefield, her mind wandered to the human soldier in the war machine, his unshakable resolve, and the belief that had driven him to fight. Her actions were still those of an empire soldier, but a seed had been planted in her heart. She no longer saw the humans as mere obstacles to overcome. She began to see them for what they truly were, fighters with purpose, with courage, with strength. For the first time, she felt the weight of her duty to the empire become unbearable. The more she thought about Marcus, the more she realized that his strength wasn't just in his fighting ability. It was in his resolve, his belief in the cause he fought for. One day, after a particularly intense battle, Alia found herself once again alone, standing on the edge of a battlefield. Her armor was scratched and scorched from the fight, but her mind was elsewhere. The sounds of the ongoing war were distant, and she barely noticed the movement behind her until it was too late. She spun around, drawing her weapon, but before she could react, a familiar voice called out to her. "Alia," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady, as he stepped out from the shadows. He was no longer in his war machine, but instead dressed in simple, practical clothes. There were no weapons in his hands, only the quiet confidence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. For a moment, Elia didn't know what to say. She had never expected to find him here standing in front of her like this. She had never imagined that they would cross paths outside the confines of the battlefield. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Marcus shrugged, lightly. "I've been watching the skies," he said. "When the fight settles down, I try to find the quiet spots, the places where people can think." Elia studied him closely. She had no idea why he would come to find her. In her world, soldiers didn't meet with the enemy. They fought until one side stood victorious. That was how things worked. But Marcus, he wasn't like anyone she had ever met. He didn't follow the rules of war that she had been taught to obey. "What do you want, Marcus?" Elia asked, not out of distrust but curiosity. She had seen him fight, had heard his words, but now she wanted to understand him. What was it that kept him going despite the overwhelming odds? "I want to end this," Marcus said, his expression serious. "I know you're a soldier of the Empire, but I believe we can find a way to stop all this fighting. We can find a way to end the war without more bloodshed." Elia was taken aback by his words. End the war? She had been trained to believe that peace was a weakness, that only by defeating the enemy could true peace be achieved. But now, standing in front of her, Marcus was offering something entirely different. He wasn't asking for her to join the rebellion. He was asking for something deeper, something more personal. "You don't understand," Elia said slowly, her voice strained. "My people are built on this war. They believe in power, in control. They will never stop fighting." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "But I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I'm asking you to think about what we're really fighting for. Is it worth all the destruction? Is it worth the lives lost?" Elia's heart pounded in her chest. She had never thought about the war this way before. For the first time, she found herself considering the possibility that Marcus might be right. What was the point of all this fighting? What was the point of victory if it only led to more pain? "I don't know," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know if I can do that." Marcus stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "We can help each other. Together, we can make a difference." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Elia had never imagined that a human could offer her something so human, something so personal, so full of hope. She had been raised to believe that strength came from domination, from power, from being above others. But Marcus was offering her something far more valuable, a chance to work together, to find a new way forward. "I can't promise anything," Elia said after a long silence, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision. "But I'm willing to listen." Marcus smiled, his expression softening. "That's all I ask," he said. "Let's take it one step at a time." Elia felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe there was more to this war than she had ever realized. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to bring peace to a world torn apart by conflict. The two of them stood there for a long moment, a silent understanding passing between them. For all the differences between them, for all the history that separated their two peoples, they had one thing in common: a desire for something better, something more than war, something more than power. As the sun set on the battlefield, Elia and Marcus turned away from the wreckage, walking side by side. They didn't know where this journey would take them, but they knew one thing. They were no longer enemies. They were allies, and together they would find a way to end the war. The war had been raging for years, and the idea of peace seemed impossible. But now, after everything that had happened, Elia felt like something had shifted. The idea that peace could be more than just a distant hope was slowly becoming a possibility. She had seen Marcus fight, not for victory, but for something deeper. His belief in freedom, in protecting others, was something that resonated with her in a way she couldn't fully explain. It was a feeling she had never felt before. Their alliance was still fragile. They were still enemies by title, still representing opposing sides in the conflict. But in their quiet moments, away from the chaos of battle, Elia and Marcus spoke, often about what they truly wanted. The more they talked, the clearer it became. The war was pointless. It was just endless cycles of destruction, and neither side would ever truly win. But even with this new understanding, there was no denying the danger that lay ahead. Elia was still a soldier of the Empire, and Marcus was still a leader of the rebellion. Their worlds were at war, and it would take more than just words to end it. They needed a plan, a way to make the leaders of their factions understand that peace was the only way forward. The plan began to take shape when Elia received an unexpected message. The alien Empire's high command had called for a meeting of all their officers. The Empire was planning a final strike to crush the rebellion once and for all, and Elia, as a respected officer, was expected to attend. She knew this would be her only chance to speak directly to the Empire's leaders, to try to convince them that the war needed to end. But it was risky. If anyone found out about her alliance with Marcus, she would be branded a traitor, and her life would be in danger. Still, the risk felt necessary. She couldn't keep fighting for something she no longer believed in. The cost of continuing the war was too great, and so, with a heavy heart and a mind full of doubt, she made her decision. She would attend the meeting, and she would try to make the Empire's leaders see reason. That evening, Elia stood before the massive council hall, her mind racing. She had never imagined that she would be standing here, hoping to convince her superiors to stop the war. She had always been one of them, loyal to the Empire, proud of its strength and its cause. But now, she was unsure. She had seen the destruction that had been wrought in the name of that cause. She had seen entire planets turn to dust, their inhabitants slaughtered without a second thought. All for the sake of power. Inside the council hall, the Empire's leaders gathered around a large table. Elia took her place among them, her eyes scanning the room, looking for the familiar faces of the officers she had once respected. But now, those faces seemed cold to her. They were the faces of the people who had caused so much suffering, and Elia couldn't ignore it anymore. "We are on the verge of victory," one of the commanders said, his voice filled with confidence. "The rebellion is crumbling. Soon, we will have complete control." Elia's heart clenched as she listened to the words. Victory? What did that even mean anymore? What would they have won? More death? More suffering? She couldn't stay silent any longer. Victory? Elia spoke up, her voice cutting through the room. What kind of victory are we talking about? A victory built on the destruction of entire civilizations? A victory that leaves nothing but ashes in its wake? "I think she's right," said a voice from the back of the room. It was a voice Elia didn't recognize, but one that carried an air of authority. "We've been so focused on defeating the enemy that we've forgotten what we're really fighting for." The room shifted again, the eyes of the commanders turning toward the new voice. Elia's heart raced as the officer continued. "We're not just fighting to win. We're fighting to protect, to preserve what's good in the galaxy. If we continue down this path, there will be nothing left to protect." Elia felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. Maybe, just maybe, there were others in the Empire who still believed in something more than conquest. She glanced at Marcus, who had managed to secretly infiltrate the council hall under the guise of a rebel diplomat. He had been waiting for this moment too, and now that they had a small opening, it was up to them to take action. The meeting continued for hours, but the conversation had changed. There were voices of dissent now, voices questioning the endless war. Slowly, the Empire's leaders began to realize that the path they had been following might not be the only way forward. The war could end, but it would require change. Change that would challenge everything they had believed about power and victory. As the meeting came to an end, Elia and Marcus exchanged a quiet glance. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time they saw a glimmer of hope. The seeds of peace had been planted, and now they would need to nurture them. "We've taken the first step," Marcus whispered as they left the council hall together. Elia nodded, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. And we will see this through. Together, the battle for peace had just begun, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Elia knew that they were on the right path. And no matter what happened next, she would fight for peace, because that was a fight worth winning. The days after the council meeting were tense. Elia's words had started a conversation within the Empire's leadership, but it wasn't enough to convince everyone. The war had been a part of their lives for so long, it was hard to imagine anything different. Yet, as the days passed, Elia could sense a shift, an unwillingness to continue down a path that led only to more destruction. There was hope, but hope alone wouldn't stop the war. Action was needed. Elia and Marcus knew that this was the moment of change, and they had to act quickly. The two of them began working together in secret, formulating a plan that could finally put an end to the conflict. They knew that the human rebellion and the alien empire were both too entrenched in their own beliefs to back down easily. They needed a way to make both sides see that their future lay in peace, not more bloodshed. But as they made their plans, an unexpected obstacle arose. The Empire, still determined to crush the rebellion, had begun a final offensive. A massive fleet was being assembled to deliver the decisive blow that would destroy the last of the human resistance. The human forces, already scattered and outnumbered, stood little chance against such an overwhelming force. Elia knew that if she did nothing, this could be the end. She couldn't allow the Empire to wipe out the rebellion, not when there was still a chance for peace. Yet stepping forward and stopping the attack would make her a traitor in the eyes of her people. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest. She had made her stand in the council, but this was different. This time, the consequences would be much greater. The entire empire would turn against her. She would lose everything. Her loyalty, her position, her entire future, all of it would be gone. Marcus, as if sensing her inner turmoil, approached her one evening, his face serious. "You're thinking about stopping the fleet," he said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. Elia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I don't, it's over. The rebellion will be destroyed and any hope for peace will be gone." "You can't do it alone," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "The consequences will be severe. They'll call you a traitor and worse." "I know," Elia replied, her voice trembling. "But what's the point of winning this war if it only leads to more killing, more death? I can't be part of that anymore." Marcus reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm with you. You don't have to do this alone. We can stop this together." The words were simple, but they filled Elia with a sense of warmth and strength. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel so alone in her fight. The rebellion had become her family, but Marcus, he had become more than just an ally. He was her partner in this. He believed in her, and in a way, he had reminded her that the fight for peace was just as important as any victory. The decision was made. Elia and Marcus would act together, using their position and knowledge to sabotage the fleet's launch. The plan was risky, and the consequences could be dire. But Elia knew that this was the only chance they had to stop the war before it consumed everything. The night before they were to carry out their plan, Elia sat alone in her quarters, staring out into the stars. The weight of her decision sat heavily on her shoulders. The Empire had always been her home, and now she was preparing to betray it. It was a feeling she had never thought she would experience, and yet here she was, on the verge of making the ultimate sacrifice. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Elia turned to see Marcus standing in the doorway. He had a quiet look on his face, one that spoke of shared understanding. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Elia nodded, her heart pounding. "As ready as I'll ever be." Marcus stepped into the room, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, they just stood there in silence. Then he spoke again, this time with a seriousness that caught Ilya off guard. "If we do this," he said, "there's no going back. We'll be hunted. We'll have no allies left. But if it works, we can end this war." "I know," Ilya replied, "but we have to try. We have to make them understand that peace is the only way." Marcus gave her a small smile. "You're not alone in this. We'll make them see." With that, they left the quarters and made their way toward the hangar, where they would board the transport ship that would take them to the fleet's location. The mission was set. They had only one shot to make it work. There could be no mistakes. When they arrived at the fleet's location, the sight before them was overwhelming. Dozens of massive ships floated in space, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. The Empire's fleet poised to destroy the rebellion once and for all. But Ilya didn't hesitate. She and Marcus made their way to the control center, where they would enact the final part of their plan. Just as they reached the control room, alarms blared and the doors slammed shut. They had been detected. Ilya's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "We can still do this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We just need to disable the weapons." Together they worked quickly, hacking into the systems and sabotaging the fleet's weapons, just as the Empire's soldiers began to surround the room. The chaos that followed was intense. Ilya and Marcus fought side by side, using their skills to hold off the soldiers and keep their mission intact. But the odds were stacked against them. As the final weapon system was disabled, a soldier's gunshot rang out, hitting Marcus in the shoulder. He fell to the ground with a grunt of pain, his hand gripping the wound. Ilya's heart stopped as she rushed to his side. "Marcus!" she shouted, panic rising in her chest. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with determination. "Finish it," he said, his voice strained. "Finish the mission. Stop the war." Ilya hesitated, but only for a moment. She had promised Marcus that they would stop this together, and now she had to finish what they started. With a final look at him, she turned and activated the last system shutdown, sending the message to the fleet to stand down. The fleet's weapons powered down, and for the first time in years, Ilya felt a glimmer of hope. The war wasn't over, but it was a start. The rebellion would survive. The Empire would listen, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for peace. The silence that followed was deafening. Ilya stood in the middle of the control room, her heart racing as the last of the weapon systems powered down. The alarms had stopped, and for the first time in years, the battlefield seemed eerily still. It was as if time itself had paused, waiting for the outcome of their actions. Beside her, Marcus was lying on the ground, his blood staining the cold metal floor. The shot had hit him square in the shoulder, and though he was still conscious, the pain was clear in his eyes. Ilya's heart twisted at the sight. She had promised him they would do this together, but now it seemed like she was on the verge of losing him. She couldn't let that happen. "Marcus," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "Stay with me." He winced but gave her a small smile. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice weak but steady. "We did it, Ilya. We stopped it." Ilya bit her lip, tears threatening to spill. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Despite all the fighting, all the planning, this was the one moment she couldn't control. The man who had shown her a different way of seeing the world, the one who had risked everything for peace, was now lying in front of her, injured and vulnerable. "Don't say that," she said, her voice cracking. "You have to stay with me. We—" But Marcus interrupted her, his hand reaching up to touch her face. "Ilya," he said softly, "this was never about me. It was always about what we could change together. What you can change." His eyes, locked with hers, full of a quiet strength that made her chest ache. "I'm not afraid. You've already done more than I could have ever imagined." Ilya nodded, trying to hold back the tears. She had to stay strong. Marcus had believed in her, and now it was her turn to believe in herself. She couldn't afford to be weak now, not when they were so close to victory. We have to get you out of here, Elia said, her voice firming up. I'll carry you if I have to. Marcus shook his head slightly, his hand gripping hers. You've already done enough. Let me do this part. You've given us a chance, Elia. Don't waste it. She hesitated, but only for a moment. She understood what he was saying. The mission was more important than anything else now. If they could just hold on long enough, if they could reach the leaders of the rebellion and the Empire, there might be a chance for peace. The war could finally end. With all the strength she could muster, Elia helped Marcus to his feet, supporting him as they made their way out of the control room. They passed through the darkened hallways, the ship now eerily quiet after the chaos of the earlier battle. Elia could feel the weight of their actions settling on her shoulders. They had done it. They had stopped the weapons from firing. But the real battle was just beginning. They finally reached the communications room where they could send a message to both the rebellion and the Empire. The plan was simple. They would broadcast a message to both sides, urging them to stand down, to negotiate, to stop the fighting. It was a risk and there was no guarantee it would work, but it was their only hope. Elia helped Marcus into a chair and she quickly began typing the message. Her hands were shaking, but she focused, determined. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, his trust in her never wavering. She couldn't let him down. She couldn't let anyone down. When the message was ready, Elia took a deep breath and hit send. The message went out across the galaxy, reaching both sides of the war. It was a simple plea for peace, a call to end the violence before it destroyed everything. Elia knew that there were people on both sides who wouldn't listen, who wouldn't want peace. But she also knew that there were others who were tired of the fighting, who wanted a future free of war. She hoped that her message would reach them, that they would see reason. They waited in silence, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Elia could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it. The decision to end the war, to change the course of history, rested in the hands of those who received the message. She had done everything she could. Now, it was out of her control. Suddenly, a soft ping came from the communication terminal. Elia's heart skipped a beat. The message had been received. She quickly opened the response. It was from the highest command of the Empire, and then a second message came in from the leaders of the rebellion. Both messages were the same. The war would end. Elia couldn't believe it. After all the battles, all the pain, all the sacrifice, the impossible had happened. The leaders of both sides had agreed to a ceasefire. Negotiations would begin immediately. The fighting was over, but the victory wasn't without cost. Marcus, still weakened from his injury, was barely holding on. His strength was fading, but he smiled, seeing the hope in Elia's eyes. You did it, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You really did it. Elia's heart swelled with pride and tears finally broke free. No, Marcus, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We did it. As the news of the ceasefire spread across the galaxy, the leaders of both the rebellion and the Empire began to make plans for peace. It would take time, and it would take work, but the war was over. The future was uncertain, but there was hope now. Elia looked down at Marcus, her partner, her ally. He had given her the strength to make the hardest decision of her life. And, now together, they had changed the course of history. The war was over. Peace was possible, and in that moment, Elia knew that the world would never be the same. Neither would she.